The lunch rush had just ended at Bellini's, leaving behind the familiar scent of garlic and white wine sauce hanging in the air. Elena wiped down her section of tables, tucking loose strands of dark hair back into her practical bun. She'd been on her feet since 7 a.m., and her back ached in that specific way that only came from carrying heavy trays and bending to serve food for hours on end. "2 more tables just got seated in your section," called out Rick, the host, as he hustled past with menus tucked under his arm. Elena glanced at the clock on the wall and sighed. She still had 4 hours until her shift ended, and then she'd rush across town to her night class on music education theory. Sleep was something that happened to other people these days. "Got it," she said, quickly checking her reflection in the polished surface of a serving tray. Dark circles had taken up permanent residence under her eyes, but her uniform was clean and her smile practiced. That's what mattered in this job. Bellini's wasn't just any restaurant in downtown Chicago. It sat on the ground floor of a sleek glass building, where investment firms and tech companies filled the upper levels. During lunch and dinner, the city's wealthiest power brokers came to see and be seen, to close deals over $200 bottles of wine and $75 steaks. The tips could be amazing on a good night, which was the only reason Elena had stayed for 3 years, even as the job slowly drained her spirit. As she approached her newly seated tables, she recognized the group of men in expensive suits at the larger one, Thornton Industries executives. They came in every few months, always loud, always demanding, and always with their CEO, Howard Thornton. Everyone in Chicago knew about Howard Thornton. His face appeared on business magazines and local news whenever his company closed another factory or bought out a struggling competitor. Just last week, Thornton Industries had shut down their manufacturing plant in Westfield, leaving over 300 people jobless right before the holidays. The morning paper had run a story about it, with a quote from Thornton saying the closure was an unfortunate necessity in a competitive global market. Elena had a cousin who'd lost his job in that closure. He had 3 kids and a mortgage. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she said, her customer service voice sliding into place like a mask. "Welcome to Bellini's. Can I start you with some drinks today?" Howard Thornton didn't look up from his phone. He was older than she expected, probably in his early 60s, with steel gray hair cropped close to his head and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by someone who didn't particularly like people. His suit probably cost more than Elena's entire year of college tuition. "Sparkling water for the table," said one of the men without consulting the others, "and we'll need a bottle of the Brunello di Montalcino, 2015. Elena nodded and turned to the second table in her section, where an older couple was studying the menu. They at least smiled when she greeted them, the woman asking questions about the specials with genuine interest. When she returned to the Thornton table with their drinks, the men were discussing profit margins and quarterly projections as if the numbers they casually tossed around weren't attached to real people's livelihoods. "We should see at least a 15% increase after the Westfield consolidation," said a man with a bright red tie. "The shareholders will be pleased." 15% is conservative," replied Thornton, speaking for the first time. His voice was deep and clipped, each word precisely measured. "I expect 20 minimum. Those operations were bleeding us dry." Elena carefully set down their drinks, trying to make herself invisible as she'd learned to do around powerful men who didn't want to be interrupted. As she reached across to place a sparkling water in front of Thornton, his sudden movement to grab his phone collided with her arm. Water splashed onto the crisp white tablecloth and a few drops landed on his suit sleeve. The table fell silent. "I'm so sorry, sir," Elena said immediately, already reaching for her service cloth to dab at the small wet spots. Thornton looked up at her slowly, as if just realizing she was a person and not merely an extension of the restaurant's furniture. His pale blue eyes were cold, assessing her with the same calculation he might use when deciding which factory to close next. "Clumsy, aren't we?" he said, his voice carrying enough for nearby tables to hear. He made no move to help, just watched as she blotted the water spots on the tablecloth. "It was an accident," she said softly. "I'll bring you a fresh glass right away. And a new tablecloth," he added, as if she couldn't see the obvious need. "I don't conduct business in wet conditions." One of his associates chuckled, and heat crept up Elena's neck. She'd dealt with difficult customers before, but something about the dismissive way Thornton looked through her, not at her, but through her, made this different. Right away, sir, she managed, keeping her voice steady. As she hurried to get a new tablecloth, she passed the baby grand piano that sat in the corner of the restaurant. Usually, Gregory played during the dinner service, filling the space with gentle classical pieces that served as background for business conversations and romantic dinners alike. But he'd called in sick today and the piano sat silent, its polished surface reflecting the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena's fingers twitched at her side, a reflex she couldn't quite control whenever she saw a piano. 10 years of playing every day, of falling asleep with sheet music instead of bedtime stories, had embedded the instrument into her muscle memory, before everything had fallen apart, before her father's sudden death and her mother's illness had drained their savings and changed the course of her life. Elena had been on track for a very different future. The Chicago Conservatory acceptance letter was still tucked in a box under her bed, a reminder of the life she'd almost had. After changing the tablecloth and bringing fresh drinks to Thornton's table, Elena continued her shift, moving between tables with practiced efficiency. The afternoon crowd thinned as business people returned to their offices, creating a brief lull before the dinner service would begin. She was restocking the service station when she heard Thornton's voice rise in complaint. What kind of establishment doesn't provide proper atmosphere? He was saying to the restaurant manager who had stopped by his table. The website clearly states live piano music daily. We specifically chose this restaurant for our meeting. I do apologize, Mr. Thornton. The manager, Paul, replied with the strained smile of someone dealing with an important customer. Our pianist called in sick unexpectedly. We'll certainly adjust your bill to reflect the inconvenience. I don't want a discount, Thornton said dismissively. I want what was advertised. This meeting is important and proper ambiance is essential. Paul's smile remained fixed, but Elena could see the panic behind his eyes. Bellini's couldn't afford to lose Thornton's business. He not only dined here regularly, but often brought clients and held corporate events in their private room. The restaurant industry ran on thin margins, and high-profile regular customers like Thornton were gold. I'm afraid we don't have a backup pianist available on such short notice, Paul explained. Elena hesitated by the service station, a stack of cloth napkins in her hands. She should keep working, mind her own business. But she'd seen the stress on Paul's face all week as he worried about the restaurant's decreasing reservations. The economy was tightening, and even upscale places like Bellini's were feeling it. She set down the napkins and walked over to the table. Excuse me, she said, interrupting their conversation. Paul turned to her with surprise and the beginning of a frown. I couldn't help overhearing. I could play for a while if it would help. Both men stared at her as if she'd offered to fly them to the moon. You? Thornton said, looking her up and down with obvious skepticism. You play piano? The way he said it made it clear what he was thinking. How could someone like her, a waitress, a nobody, possibly have such a refined skill? I studied for many years, she said, keeping her voice professional despite the knot forming in her stomach. It had been a mistake to speak up. Classical training. I could cover for an hour or so before the dinner rush. Paul's expression shifted from surprise to consideration. I didn't know you played, Elena. It's been a while, she admitted. But it's like riding a bike, right? Thornton leaned back in his chair, studying her with those cold eyes. A hint of amusement flickered across his face, but not the kind that suggested he found anything genuinely funny. More like he'd spotted an opportunity for entertainment at someone else's expense. Well, he said slowly, this is unexpected. The waitress thinks she can provide our musical accompaniment. He glanced at his associates, who chuckled on cue. I'm curious now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting a crisp $100 bill that he placed on the table with deliberate slowness. I dare you, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Play something worthy of this establishment, and this is yours. His lips curved into what might generously be called a smile. Or perhaps you'd rather stick to what you know. The restaurant had grown quieter, nearby tables sensing the drama unfolding. Elena felt a flush creeping up her neck, but something else too, a spark of anger and determination that had been buried under years of practical choices and deferred dreams. In the silence that followed, the $100 bill seemed to glow on the white tablecloth, both an insult and a challenge. Elena looked from it to Howard Thornton's smug face, then to Paul's worried expression. She had a choice to make. The $100 bill sat on the table between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Elena felt every eye in the restaurant on her. The back of her neck grew hot with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. She hadn't touched a piano in public for years, and now this man wanted to make a spectacle of her. "I don't think," Paul began, clearly trying to defuse the situation. "It's fine," Elena cut in. A strange calm settled over her. She untied her black apron and handed it to Paul. "I'll play for a bit." Howard Thornton raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised she'd accepted his dare. "Well then," he said, gesturing toward the piano with a manicured hand. "Let's see what you can do." As Elena walked toward the baby grand in the corner, her heart hammered against her ribs. What was she thinking? Her skills were probably rusty after all this time. She'd practiced occasionally on the old upright piano in her apartment building's community room, but that was hardly the same as performing. The restaurant had fallen completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had paused to watch through the serving window. Elena could feel Thornton's cold eyes following her, waiting for her to embarrass herself. She sat down at the bench and adjusted it slightly, muscle memory taking over. The polished black and white keys gleamed under the soft lighting. Elena placed her hands on them, feeling their cool, smooth surface beneath her fingertips. For a moment, she was 14 again, sitting at her father's piano as he stood behind her, gently correcting her posture. "Back straight, chin up," he'd say in his accented English. "When you play, you speak through your fingers. Make sure they have something worth saying." Her father had been a music professor back in their home country before they immigrated to America, when Elena was 7. He'd never found a teaching position here, settling instead for giving private lessons and tuning pianos. But he'd poured all his knowledge and passion into teaching his only daughter. Elena took a deep breath and began to play. She started with something simple, a Bach prelude, one of the first complex pieces she'd mastered as a child. Her fingers were stiff at first, like they'd forgotten their purpose. A wrong note slipped in, then another. From the corner of her eye, she caught Thornton smirking. That spark of anger flared again. She'd show him. She transitioned smoothly into Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece that had always felt like home to her. As the familiar melody flowed, her hands remembered their old confidence. The restaurant around her faded away until there was nothing but the music. The Debussy piece ended, and without pausing, Elena moved into Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the piece she'd been practicing when she received her conservatory acceptance letter. It was challenging, with its shifting tempos and emotional complexity, but her fingers found their way through the difficult passages as if guided by something beyond herself. She'd forgotten what this felt like. The complete immersion in sound. The way the world narrowed to just her and the piano, having a conversation no one else could quite understand. Tears pricked behind her eyes as she played through the most passionate section, pouring years of buried grief and postponed dreams into the keys. As the final notes of the Chopin piece faded, Elena became aware of the absolute silence in the restaurant. She opened her eyes, not realizing she had closed them, and saw dozens of stunned faces staring back at her. Several patrons had tears in their eyes. The kitchen staff stood frozen in the doorway, and Howard Thornton, the man who had dared her, who had expected her to fail, sat completely still, his face unreadable. Then, someone began to clap. The sound was joined by another and another, until the entire restaurant erupted in applause. A few people rose to their feet. Elena felt her cheeks flush, this time with pleasure rather than shame. She stood from the bench on shaky legs, unsure what to do next. Playing had unlocked something inside her, bringing back the person she'd been before, the one who dreamed of concert halls and music schools, not just making it through another double shift. Howard Thornton rose from his table and approached her. The restaurant grew quiet again, anticipating another confrontation. Elena straightened her shoulders, ready for whatever dismissive comment he might make. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, his voice different now, the coldness replaced by something that sounded almost like respect. "My father taught me," she replied. "He was a professor of music before we came to this country. And you're waiting tables because—" Elena glanced at Paul, who was watching with a mix of amazement and concern. "Life happens," she said simply. "My father passed away. My mother got sick. College is expensive even with scholarships. Thornton nodded slowly. For the first time, he seemed to be looking at her, actually seeing her as a person rather than just part of the restaurant furniture. "What's your name?" he asked. Elena Ramirez." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "My daughter runs the Thornton Arts Foundation. You should call her." Elena took the card automatically, confused by this sudden shift. "I don't understand." "The foundation funds scholarships and performance opportunities for talented artists," he explained. "Mostly privileged kids from the right families, if I'm being honest. It could use someone like you." "Mr. Thornton," called one of the executives from their table. "We should continue our meeting. We're on a schedule." Thornton waved him off without turning around. "Do you have other pieces in your repertoire?" he asked Elena. "Many," she replied. "I was accepted to the Chicago Conservatory before." She trailed off, not wanting to explain her whole life story in the middle of the restaurant. "Play something else," Thornton said. It wasn't exactly a request, but it wasn't the same demanding tone he'd used earlier. Paul stepped forward. "Sir, Elena needs to return to her tables." "The dinner service, I'll cover her section," offered Lily, another server who had been watching the whole scene. "I don't mind. And I'll double whatever she would have made in tips tonight," added Thornton. Pulling out his wallet again, Paul hesitated, clearly torn between restaurant protocol and the strange spell that had fallen over Bellini's. Finally he nodded. "1 hour," he said to Elena, "if you're willing." Elena looked down at the business card in her hand, then at the piano that had momentarily transported her back to the life she'd once imagined for herself. An hour of playing instead of carrying trays and taking orders? It wasn't even a choice. "I'm willing," she said. As she returned to the piano bench, murmurs of anticipation rippled through the restaurant. Even the couple who had been waiting for their check seemed content to linger longer to hear her play again. Elena settled at the keys and began a Schubert impromptu, filling the space with music that danced and sparkled like sunlight on water. As she played, she noticed Thornton return to his table, but instead of resuming his meeting, he sat back in his chair and simply listened. His usual intense focus directed now at her performance. The next hour passed in a blur. Elena moved from piece to piece, sometimes taking requests called out by appreciative diners. With each song, she felt layers of exhaustion and resignation falling away, revealing the core of who she truly was. People came in from the street, drawn by the music spilling out onto the sidewalk. The bar area filled with patrons who ordered drinks and stood listening instead of claiming tables for dinner. Paul, initially worried about the disruption to normal service, now moved through the crowd with a proud smile as people asked about the pianist. Between pieces, Elena stole glances at Thornton's table. The business meeting had clearly been forgotten, papers pushed aside as the executives sat back with drinks, their earlier stress replaced by something approaching contentment. When Elena finally played the last notes of a gentle Brahms lullaby and stood from the bench, the restaurant once again erupted in applause. People she'd served countless times without receiving so much as a glance now approached to compliment her playing, to ask where she performed regularly, to express astonishment at discovering her talent. As the applause faded and the normal rhythms of the restaurant slowly resumed, Elena made her way back to the service station to retrieve her apron. Paul intercepted her, his expression a mixture of amazement and calculation. "That was unexpected," he said. "How long have you been holding out on us?" Elena smiled tiredly. "It never came up in the job interview." "Well, it's coming up now," Paul replied. "We've been looking for someone to play weekends since Gregory can only do weeknights. The pay isn't much, but it's better than server wages, and the hours would be more consistent." Elena stared at him, processing his words. "Are you offering me a job?" "As a pianist?" "If you want it," Paul nodded. "Based on what I just heard and the reaction from our customers, I'd be crazy not to." Before she could respond, Howard Thornton approached them. He'd been detained by several other diners, stopping him to comment on Elena's performance, as if her talent somehow reflected on him since he'd been the one to challenge her. "Ms. Ramirez," he said formally, extending his hand, "I owe you an apology and my thanks. You've reminded me of something I'd forgotten." Elena shook his hand, still somewhat dazed by everything that had happened. "What's that?" A hint of a genuine smile softened his stern features. "That sometimes the most extraordinary things are hidden in plain sight. We just have to be willing to see them." He nodded toward the business card she'd tucked into her pocket. Call that number tomorrow. My daughter will be expecting to hear from you. As Thornton returned to his table and Elena turned to respond to Paul's job offer, she felt a strange lightness in her chest, a feeling she recognized after a moment as hope. The $100 bill that had started it all still lay on Thornton's table, forgotten by everyone, including her. She didn't need it anymore. She'd found something far more valuable. Elena woke the next morning with her fingers still tingling, as if they remembered the feel of the piano keys beneath them. For a moment, she wondered if she'd dreamed the whole thing, playing at Bellini's, the applause, Howard Thornton's unexpected offer. But then she spotted the business card on her nightstand and knew it had all been real. She picked up the card, running her thumb over the embossed lettering, Thornton Arts Foundation, followed by a phone number and the name, Alexandra Thornton, Executive Director, Howard's daughter, presumably. Elena tried to imagine what kind of woman would be raised by a man like Howard Thornton. Probably someone who'd never worried about making rent or choosing between textbooks and groceries. Elena's tiny apartment was quiet, except for the distant rumble of the L train. Her roommate, Tina, had already left for her nursing shift at the hospital. They'd been friends since high school, and when Elena's mother got sick 2 years ago, Tina had helped her find this affordable place close to both the hospital and the community college, where Elena took her music education classes. She glanced at her phone. It was just past 9 in the morning, later than she usually slept, but Paul had insisted she take today off after the events of the previous evening. You brought in more customers in 1 hour than we usually see all night, he'd said as she was leaving. Consider it a bonus. Elena made herself a cup of coffee and sat down at her small kitchen table staring at the business card. Should she actually call? What would she even say? Hi, your father dared me to play piano and now he thinks you should… What, give me money? A job? A scholarship? It sounded absurd when she thought about it that way. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tina. OMG, check your Insta right now. Confused, Elena opened the app and nearly dropped her phone. Someone had posted a video of her playing at Bellini's last night. The caption read, Hidden talent discovered at Bellini's. Our waitress Elena turned out to be a piano prodigy. Mind blown to classical music, hidden talent. The video already had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Elena's hand shook slightly as she scrolled through them. This gave me chills. Who is she? Does she have a concert schedule? That Chopin piece destroyed me. I'm in tears. Can't believe she's just a waitress with this level of talent. That last comment stung a little, but Elena understood the sentiment. She'd thought the same thing about herself many times over the years. Just a waitress. Not a musician, not a student at the conservatory, not the person she'd planned to become. Her phone rang. It was Paul from the restaurant. Elena, have you seen what's happening online? He asked without preamble. Just now. I had no idea someone was recording. Everyone was recording, Paul said, and she could hear the excitement in his voice. We've had 30 calls this morning asking if you'll be playing again tonight. The reservation system crashed. We're completely booked for the next 2 weeks. Elena sat down, stunned. All because of me playing piano for an hour? Apparently so, Paul said. Listen, I need to know if you're serious about taking the weekend pianist position. I need to tell people something. Elena's mind raced. Can I have today to think about it? Sure, but I'll need to know by tomorrow at the latest. Oh, and someone from the Tribune called. They want to do a feature story on you. After hanging up, Elena sat in silence trying to process everything. Yesterday, she'd been just another server, invisible to the customers she served. Today, people were calling to hear her play. The Tribune wanted to interview her. It didn't seem real. Her gaze fell on her mother's framed photo on the wall. Elena felt a pang of both sadness and determination. Her mother had been so proud when Elena received her acceptance to the conservatory. She'd framed the letter, even though they both knew Elena wouldn't be able to attend. Not after her father's death left them with medical bills and funeral costs, and definitely not after her mother's own diagnosis. Music is a luxury we can't afford right now, her mother had said gently, returning the conservatory letter to Elena. But someday, mi vida, someday. That someday had seemed so distant, almost imaginary, until now. Elena picked up the business card again and dialed the number before she could talk herself out of it. Thornton Arts Foundation. This is Alexandra speaking. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. Elena took a deep breath. Hello, my name is Elena Ramirez. Howard Thornton gave me your card last night and suggested I call. There was a brief pause, then Alexandra's tone warmed considerably. Elena, yes, my father called me about you last night. He was quite impressed, which doesn't happen often. I've already seen the video. There's a video? Elena asked, then immediately felt foolish. I mean, I just saw it's online, but I didn't realize. Alexandra laughed, a surprisingly warm sound that didn't match Elena's mental image of Howard Thornton's daughter. Several videos, actually. But listen, I'd love to meet with you and discuss how the foundation might be able to help. Are you free for lunch today? Elena agreed to meet at a cafe near the foundation's office downtown. After hanging up, she stood in the middle of her apartment, feeling as if her life had suddenly accelerated to a speed she wasn't prepared for. She needed to clear her head. 20 minutes later, Elena was sitting beside her mother's hospital bed holding her thin hand. Maria Ramirez had been fighting lymphoma for nearly 2 years, the treatments leaving her fragile but still stubbornly hanging on. Elena visited every day, usually bringing small treats or stories from work to brighten her mother's spirits. Today, she brought something else. Hope, Mama. Something incredible happened, Elena said. Pulling out her phone to show her mother the video, Maria watched with tears forming in her dark eyes, her face lighting up with a joy Elena hadn't seen in months. When the video ended, she squeezed Elena's hand. Your father is watching from heaven, she said in Spanish. He always said you would find your way back to music. I'm meeting with someone from an arts foundation today, Elena explained, and the restaurant wants me to play on weekends. The Thornton Foundation? Maria asked, surprising Elena. I read about them in the community newspaper. They funded the new music program at the Children's Hospital. Elena nodded. Howard Thornton heard me play last night. By accident, really. There are no accidents, mi vida, Maria said with the quiet wisdom that had guided Elena through every hard decision. Only opportunities wearing different clothes. Elena smiled, her mother's words settling something inside her. This was an opportunity, however strangely it had arrived. She would be a fool not to embrace it. After promising to return the next day with news from her meeting, Elena kissed her mother goodbye and headed downtown. She'd changed into the nicest outfit she owned. Black, pants and a blue blouse she usually saved for job interviews, but still felt underdressed as she approached the gleaming office building where the Thornton Foundation was housed. The cafe where she was meeting Alexandra was on the ground floor, an elegant space with marble tables and floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena spotted a woman sitting alone at a corner table working on a laptop. She was younger than Elena had expected, maybe in her early 30s with her father's steel-gray eyes but a more approachable presence. Alexandra? Elena asked as she approached. The woman looked up and smiled, standing to shake Elena's hand. Please call me Alex, and you must be Elena. It's wonderful to meet you. They sat down and Alex ordered coffee for both of them. So, she said once the server had left, you've certainly made an impression on my father. That doesn't happen often. It wasn't intentional, Elena admitted. He dared me to play and I just showed him up? Alex suggested with a hint of amusement. Good, he needs that occasionally. She studied Elena for a moment. Tell me about your background. My father mentioned your father was a music professor? Elena nodded, giving Alex the condensed version of her story. Her father's teaching career in Mexico, their immigration when Elena was young, the years of piano lessons, her acceptance to the conservatory, and the series of events that had derailed those plans. Alex listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a small pad. When Elena finished, she asked, And what do you want now? If you could choose any path forward with your music, what would it be? The question caught Elena off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked her what she wanted, rather than what she could manage or afford. I want to finish my education, she said after a moment, and I want to perform. But most of all, I want to teach like my father did. Music saved me during the hardest times in my life. I want to help give that gift to others, especially kids who might not otherwise have access to it. Alex smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. That's exactly the kind of mission our foundation supports. She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. This is our Emerging Artists program. It provides full scholarships to complete formal music education, plus stipends for living expenses and performance opportunities. Elena opened the folder with trembling fingers. The numbers she saw there made her dizzy. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having access to. We typically select candidates through a rigorous audition process, Alex continued. But in your case, I think last night's performance and the public response to it serves as a rather spectacular audition. Are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to offer you a place in the program, Alex confirmed. Starting immediately if you're interested. Elena stared at the papers in front of her, trying to process what was happening. Yesterday she'd been worrying about making rent. Today she was being offered the chance to reclaim the future she'd thought was lost forever. I don't know what to say, she managed finally. Alex smiled again. Most people just say yes. What's the catch? Elena asked, her natural caution resurfacing. Nothing comes for free, especially from wealthy people. No offense. None taken, Alex replied with a short laugh. The catch, as you put it, is that scholarship recipients perform at foundation events and teach in our community programs. Based on what you just told me about wanting to teach, I don't think that will be a problem. Elena looked down at the papers again, then back up at Alex, searching for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. She found none, only a genuine enthusiasm that seemed at odds with the cold calculation she'd seen in Howard Thornton. Why is your father doing this? She asked suddenly. He didn't strike me as the charitable type. Alex's expression softened. My father is uncomplicated, but music has always been important to him even if he doesn't show it publicly. My mother was a concert pianist before she died. I think you reminded him of her last night. She shrugged slightly. Or maybe you just surprised him. That doesn't happen often either. Elena nodded slowly, thinking about the way Thornton had looked at her after she played, not with his earlier contempt, but with something like recognition. As if he'd seen past the waitress uniform to the person beneath. So, Alex said, pulling out a pen. What do you say, Elena? Ready to be a musician again? The question hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. Elena thought about her mother's words. There are no accidents, only opportunities wearing different clothes. She took the pen. Yes, she said. I'm ready. 3 weeks after signing the scholarship papers, Elena stood in the doorway of her new apartment, still not quite believing it was hers. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the hardwood floors and white walls. It wasn't huge, but compared to the cramped place she'd shared with Tina, it felt like a palace. And in the center of the living room sat the most beautiful thing Elena had ever seen. A baby grand piano, its polished ebony surface gleaming in the morning light. It's part of the scholarship, Alex had explained when she showed Elena the apartment. All our musicians need proper instruments to practice on. Elena walked slowly to the piano and ran her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them down. She was afraid to play it, afraid that somehow this would all disappear, that she'd wake up back in her old life, rushing to make it to her shift at Bellini's on time. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alex. How's the new place? Ready for your first day of classes tomorrow? Elena smiled. In the short time she'd known her, Alex had become more than just her benefactor. She'd become something close to a friend. Despite coming from such different worlds, they shared a love of music and a practical approach to life that created an unexpected bond. Still setting up, Elena texted back. Piano is incredible. Nervous about tomorrow. Alex's reply came quickly. You'll be fine. Remember, you already passed the hardest audition, playing for my father. Elena laughed, then turned her attention back to the piano. It was time. She sat down on the bench, adjusted her posture the way her father had taught her, and began to play. The sound was magnificent, rich and resonant in a way her old upright piano never could have managed. Elena closed her eyes, letting her fingers find their way through a Beethoven sonata, each note ringing clear and true. This was what she'd been missing all these years, not just playing, but playing on an instrument worthy of the music. When she finished, she heard clapping from the doorway. She turned to see Tina standing there with a box in her arms. Don't stop on my account, Tina said, setting down the box. I could listen to that all day. Last of my stuff? Elena asked, getting up to hug her friend. Yep, your entire life fits in 5 boxes. Pretty impressive. Tina looked around the apartment, whistling softly. This place is something else. And that piano probably costs more than all the furniture I've ever owned. I still can't believe it's real, Elena admitted. Keep expecting someone to tell me there's been a mistake. No mistake, Tina assured her. You earned this, Elle. All those years of working doubles and studying at night, not giving up even when things were at their worst. She squeezed Elena's shoulder. Your dad would be so proud. Elena nodded, a lump forming in her throat. I wish he could see this. He can, Tina said simply, just in a different way than we'd like. They spent the next hour unpacking Elena's few possessions, making the sleek apartment feel a bit more like home. When they finished, Tina had to leave for her shift at the hospital. Don't forget the little people now that you're famous, she teased at the door. I'm hardly famous, Elena protested, though the view count on her video had passed 1 million and she'd had to set all her social media accounts to private after the flood of friend requests and messages. Tell that to the reporters who keep calling the hospital asking for dirt on you, Tina replied. I told them you sleep with a stuffed penguin and sing in the shower. You did not. Only the penguin part, Tina winked. Good luck tomorrow. Call me after and tell me everything. After Tina left, Elena walked around the apartment, still marveling at the turn her life had taken. The scholarship covered not just her tuition at the Chicago Conservatory, where she'd finally be able to attend 4 years late, but also this apartment, living expenses, the piano, and even new clothes for performances. The foundation wanted their scholars to focus entirely on music, without financial distractions. It seemed too good to be true, which was why Elena had spent hours reading the fine print in the contract, questioning Alex about obligations and contingencies. But there were no hidden catches, just the requirement to maintain good academic standing, perform at foundation events, and teach in their community program for at least 5 hours each week. We're investing in your future, Alex had explained. The only return we expect is for you to become the best musician you can be, and to pass that gift on to others. Elena's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her mother. Hola, mamá, she answered, switching to Spanish as she always did with her mother. How are you feeling today? Better, Maria replied, and Elena could hear the truth in her voice. Her mother did sound stronger than she had in months. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her latest round of treatments. The nurse helped me watch more videos of you playing. So many people love your music now. It's still strange, Elena admitted. Yesterday, a woman stopped me in the grocery store and asked for my autograph. Her mother laughed. You'd better practice your signature then. Soon you'll be signing concert programs. That's a long way off, Mama. Not so long, Maria countered. Alexandra called me this morning. Elena frowned. Alex called you? Why? To invite me to your first recital at the foundation next month. She's arranging special transportation from the hospital. Maria's voice wavered slightly. I will be there, mi vida. I will see you play on a real stage. Tears sprang to Elena's eyes. She hadn't dared hope her mother would be well enough to attend the recital. That would mean everything, Mama. Then it's settled. Now tell me about your new home. Is it beautiful? Elena described the apartment and the piano, her mother making appreciative sounds at all the right moments. When she hung up, Elena felt a surge of determination. She would make the most of this opportunity, for herself, for her mother, for her father's memory. She returned to the piano and began to play again, this time working through the pieces she would need to prepare for her placement audition at the conservatory tomorrow. Though she'd already been accepted to the program through the foundation, she still needed to be assessed for proper class placement. Hours slipped by as she practiced, stopping occasionally to make notes on her sheet music or repeat difficult passages. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the knock at first. When it came again, louder, she jumped slightly and went to the door. She was stunned to find Howard Thornton standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable in a way she wouldn't have thought possible for a man of such intimidating confidence. Mr. Thornton, she said, too surprised to say more. Ms. Ramirez, he replied with a curt nod. I apologize for coming unannounced. Alexandra mentioned you'd moved in today. Please come in, Elena said, stepping back from the door. Thornton entered the apartment, his tall frame and expensive suit making the space seem suddenly smaller. He glanced around, nodding slightly as if approving of what he saw, then his eyes settled on the piano. Have you been practicing? He asked. Yes, all afternoon. Good. The instrument suits you? It's magnificent, Elena said honestly. I've never played anything like it. Thornton nodded again. An awkward silence fell between them. He clearly wasn't a man accustomed to small talk. I heard you playing as I came up the hall, he said finally. Chopin's ballad again? It's my audition piece for tomorrow, Elena explained. I'm still trying to get the final section right. Something shifted in Thornton's expression, a softening around the eyes, perhaps. May I? He asked, gesturing to the piano. Surprised, Elena nodded. Thornton walked to the instrument and sat down with the ease of someone very familiar with pianos. Without preamble, he began to play the exact passage Elena had been struggling with, his large hand spanning the keys with practiced precision. His technique wasn't as polished as a professional pianist's, but there was an emotional quality to his playing that caught Elena off guard. When he finished, he turned to her. The trick is in the phrasing. You're rushing the transition. Let it breathe here, he demonstrated again, more slowly. Then the final run has more impact. Elena stared at him. You play. I used to, he corrected. My wife was the real musician in the family. I just dabbled. Elena remembered what Alex had said about her mother being a concert pianist. She approached the piano and Thornton stood to give her the bench. Like this? She asked, trying the passage as he'd suggested. Better. He nodded. But feel the rhythm more here. He tapped the sheet music. For the next 20 minutes, to Elena's continued amazement, Howard Thornton gave her what amounted to a piano lesson. He was direct and occasionally blunt in his corrections, but there was none of the condescension she'd seen that first night at Bellini's. Finally, Elena played the entire ballade from beginning to end, incorporating his suggestions. When she finished, Thornton was silent for a long moment. That was exceptional, he said at last. You have a gift, Ms. Ramirez, a rare one. Thank you, Elena replied, feeling strangely moved by his approval. And thank you for everything else, the scholarship, this apartment, the piano. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Thornton shook his head. There's nothing to repay. Alexandra runs the foundation, not me. She makes the decisions about scholarships. But you told her about me, Elena pointed out. You gave me her card. Thornton looked uncomfortable again. I merely made an introduction. Your talent did the rest. He checked his watch and moved toward the door. I should let you get back to practicing. You have a busy day tomorrow. At the door, he paused. My wife would have enjoyed hearing you play, he said so quietly Elena almost missed it. She believed music was the only truly universal language. Then he was gone, leaving Elena to wonder about the complicated man behind the cold businessman's facade. There were clearly depths to Howard Thornton that she hadn't imagined that first night at the restaurant. She returned to the piano, considering his advice about the Chopin piece. As she played the passage again, she had to admit he was right. It flowed much better with the slight adjustment to timing. Tomorrow she would begin her new life as a music student. Her path had taken a detour, a long, difficult one, but somehow she'd found her way back. And strangely enough, she had a rude dare from an arrogant industrialist to thank for it. Elena played until the sun set, until her fingers ached and her heart felt full, until the music spilled out the open windows and into the Chicago evening, carrying with it all her hopes for the future that now, finally, lay open before her. 6 months had passed since the night Elena played piano at Bellini's, and sometimes she still couldn't believe how much her life had changed. Today marked another milestone, her first major recital at the Thornton Arts Center, a converted historic theater in downtown Chicago, where the foundation hosted performances by its scholarship recipients and visiting artists. Elena stood backstage, peering through a gap in the curtains at the audience filing into the elegant hall. Every seat was filled. 300 people had come to hear her play. Among them were her former co-workers from Bellini's, her professor from the community college, and Tina, who had helped coordinate her mother's special transportation from the hospital. Nervous? Elena turned to find Alex standing behind her, elegant in a simple black dress. Terrified, Elena admitted. What if I mess up? What if I forget the music? What if you're brilliant and everyone loves you? Alex interrupted with a smile. Because that's what's going to happen. She handed Elena a small box, a little tradition we have for first recitals. Elena opened it to find a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny piano charm. It's beautiful, she said, slipping it on her wrist. My mother received one before her first professional performance, Alex explained. My father gave them to all the foundation's featured artists after that. Speaking of your father, Elena said, is he coming tonight? She hadn't seen Howard Thornton since his unexpected visit to her apartment that first day, though she'd heard plenty about him from Alex. Front row, center, Alex confirmed. He wouldn't miss it. A stagehand approached to let them know they had 5 minutes before the program began. Alex squeezed Elena's hand and left to take her seat, while Elena retreated to a quiet corner for a final moment of preparation. She closed her eyes, thinking back over the whirlwind month since receiving the scholarship. The conservatory classes had been challenging, especially at first. Many of her classmates were younger and had never stopped playing, while Elena had to rebuild some of her technical skills after years away from serious study. But what she lacked in recent practice, she made up for in life experience and determination. Her professors quickly recognized her natural musicality and emotional depth. By the end of her first month, she'd been moved to advanced classes, where she thrived despite the demanding workload. Meanwhile, her weekly teaching commitment at the Foundation's community music program had become the highlight of her schedule. She taught piano to children from low-income neighborhoods, many of whom reminded her of herself at that age, full of potential but lacking opportunity. Watching their faces light up when they mastered a simple melody brought her a different kind of joy than performing did, but one equally powerful, and through it all, her mother's health had gradually improved. The doctors were now using words like remission and recovery, though they remained cautiously optimistic. Maria had been released from the hospital 2 weeks ago and was now staying with Elena's aunt, growing stronger each day. Ms. Ramirez, it's time. Elena opened her eyes, nodded to the stagehand, and walked toward the stage. As the curtain rose, the polished grand piano came into view, spotlit and waiting. The audience applauded as she crossed to it, her simple midnight blue dress catching the light. She sat, adjusted the bench, and looked out at the sea of faces. In the front row, as Alex had said, sat Howard Thornton, his expression inscrutable as always. Beside him was her mother, thin but radiant in a new dress Elena had bought her, and next to her Alex. Seeing the three of them, together, the people most responsible for this moment in entirely different ways, gave Elena a sense of her journey coming full circle. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Her program started with Bach, precise and mathematical yet flowing like a clear stream. She moved through Schubert, then a brief spirited piece by a contemporary composer. The audience responded warmly to each, but Elena knew the true test would be the final piece. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the same piece she'd played that night at Bellini's, the piece that had changed everything. As she began the opening notes, soft and questioning, Elena let herself remember. The exhaustion of double shifts, the worry about her mother, the grief for her father, the dreams she'd set aside. All of it had led her here to this moment. The music grew in intensity, her fingers flying over the keys as the complex emotions of the piece matched her own journey from struggle to triumph. When the final chords resounded through the hall, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted, rising to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to lift the roof. Elena stood, breathless and exhilarated, bowing as flowers were brought to the stage. Backstage after the performance, Elena was surrounded by well-wishers. Her former manager from Bellini's announced they'd named a cocktail after her, the Elena, and that her video still played on the screen above the bar. Her professors praised her interpretation and dynamics. Tina hugged her fiercely, whispering, "Told you so," in her ear. Finally, the crowd parted to reveal her mother being pushed in a wheelchair by Alex. "Mi vida," Maria said, her eyes shining with tears as Elena knelt beside her. "I always knew this day would come. You never let me forget it was possible," Elena replied, clasping her mother's hands. "Your father was there with you tonight," Maria said softly. "I felt him in the music." Elena nodded, too moved to speak. Over her mother's shoulder, she noticed Howard Thornton standing slightly apart from the celebration, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'll be right back," she told her mother, then made her way through the crowd to where Thornton stood. "Thank you for coming," she said. He nodded stiffly. "Your performance was exceptional." "I used your advice on the phrasing in the final section," Elena told him. It made all the difference. Something like surprise flickered across Thornton's face, followed by a hint of pleasure. "You've progressed remarkably in 6 months." "I had help," Elena acknowledged. "From my professors, from Alex, from you." Thornton waved this away. "I merely provided an opportunity. You did the work." He hesitated, then added, "Your mother appears to be doing better." "Yes, much better. The doctors are hopeful." "Good." He cleared his throat. "I've been following your progress through Alexandra. She says you have a particular talent for teaching." Elena smiled. "I love it. The kids are amazing. The foundation is considering expanding our community music program," Thornton said. "Alexandra suggested you might be interested in taking on a larger role once you complete your degree." Elena stared at him, surprised. "She hasn't mentioned it to me." "She wanted my opinion first," he admitted. "I told her it was an excellent idea. You understand what music can mean to children with limited opportunities. You've lived it." The fact that Howard Thornton, who once hadn't even bothered to look at her as she served his table, now valued her opinion enough to consider her for such a position, wasn't lost on Elena. "I'd be very interested," she said. Thornton nodded, looking almost relieved. "Good. Alexandra will discuss the details with you." He glanced over at where Maria and Alex were chatting. "Your mother must be proud." "She is," Elena agreed. "She never stopped believing this was possible, even when I did." "A wise woman," Thornton said quietly. He seemed about to say something more when they were interrupted by a photographer from the Tribune, wanting a picture of Elena with the Thorntons for their art section. As they posed, Elena in the center, flanked by Howard and Alexandra, Elena thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought them all together. If Howard hadn't dared her to play that night, if she hadn't accepted the challenge, if Alex hadn't called her the next day, any break in that chain would have led to a completely different life. After the photographer left, Elena excused herself to return to her mother, who was beginning to look tired from all the excitement. As they made arrangements to take her back to the aunt's apartment, Elena caught sight of Howard Thornton standing alone by the piano on stage, running his hand lightly over its polished surface with what looked like longing. The following week, Elena received a package at her apartment. Inside was an old leather-bound book of Chopin's collected works, the pages yellowed with age and covered in handwritten notes. A simple card accompanied it. "These were my wife's. She would want you to have them." H.T. Elena carefully turned the fragile pages, seeing the penciled notations in the margins. Observations about tempo, phrasing, emotional interpretation. She recognized some of the same advice Thornton had given her that day in her apartment. These had been his wife's notes, but he had studied them, absorbed them, kept her musical insights alive in his memory. That evening, Elena sat at her piano with the old book propped on the music stand. She began to play, following the handwritten suggestions of a pianist she'd never met but whose legacy had somehow found its way to her. The music filled her apartment as the sun set over Chicago, the notes speaking across time, from her father's first lessons, to the woman whose book she now held, to the children she taught, and onward into a future full of possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. In a penthouse across the city, Howard Thornton stood at his window, a glass of scotch in his hand. In the quiet of his empty home, he could almost hear the music. His wife's favorite pieces now brought back to life by a young woman who'd reminded him that beauty could appear in the most unexpected places, if only one took the time to truly listen. And in that moment, for both of them, the music was enough.